Brave New Work is by Aaron Dignan. He encourages organizations to rethink their systems and adapt to modern needs. The book shares insights on improving teamwork and decision-making. What will you learn from this book? This book helps you change your organization to do better work. It shows how to move away from old, rigid ways of working that slow you down. You'll learn to create a more flexible and human-centered workplace. The book offers ideas, not strict rules, so you can find what works best for you. Who should read this book? Anyone feeling stuck in outdated work processes should read this book. It's for leaders and employees who want to innovate and thrive in today's fast-paced world. Brave New Work by Aaron Dignan. Are you ready to reinvent your organization? Spark 1. The crisis in traditional organizations. In the fast-paced world of business today, many companies are struggling to keep up. The way we've been working for decades just isn't cutting it anymore. Imagine this. During World War II, there was a manual created to teach people how to sabotage enemy organizations. The funny thing is, a lot of the things in that manual are exactly what happens in many offices today. For example, the manual suggested making it hard to access work resources by setting up complicated systems, never allowing shortcuts to speed up processes, and always following every single rule. Sound familiar? It's like our modern workplaces are sabotaging themselves without even realizing it. This situation is causing big problems for companies. Let's look at some facts. 1. Companies don't last as long as they used to. In the past, a company could expect to stay on the S&P 500 list for about 60 years. Now, it's only about 10 years. 2. Companies aren't making as much money from what they own. This is called return on assets, and it's dropped from nearly 5% in 1965 to just above 1% now. 3. We're not getting more productive. Even with all our amazing technology, we're not able to make more stuff per hour than we could 10 or 20 years ago. If you ask an economist why this is happening, they might not have a clear answer. But if you ask the workers on the ground, dealing with day-to-day problems, they'll tell you. It's because of bureaucracy. All those rules, processes, and layers of management are slowing everything down and making it hard to get work done. Spark 2. The problem of organizational debt. Let's talk about something called organizational debt. It's like when you have a bunch of old rules and ways of doing things that might have made sense once, but now they just slow everything down and cause problems. Here's a real-life example. There was a company in Europe called Favi that makes auto parts. While many other European auto parts makers went out of business because of competition from China, Favi actually started selling to China, but they weren't always successful. They used to have a big problem with bureaucracy. Imagine this. A worker needs a new pair of gloves. In most companies, you'd think they could just go grab a new pair, right? But at Favi, before they changed things, it was a whole ordeal. The worker had to show their old gloves to a manager, get a permission slip, go to a special cage where the gloves were kept, wait for someone to help them, hand over the slip, get the gloves, go back to the manager to get the slip stamped, and only then could they go back to work. This whole process took about 30 minutes. Now, a pair of gloves only costs about €5. But leaving a machine unmanned for 30 minutes could cost the company €5,000. That's a huge waste of time and money, all because of a rule that was probably made to stop people from stealing gloves. This is what we mean by organizational debt. It's all those procedures and policies that might have made sense at one point, but now they're just getting in the way. Companies often create these rules as automatic responses to problems. Something goes wrong, so they make a new rule to prevent it from happening again. But over time, all these rules add up and start to cause more problems than they solve. The urge to fix issues by making more rules is deeply ingrained in how we think about work. It goes back more than 100 years. If we want to change this, we need to understand where it all started. Spark 3. The legacy operating system. Managers think, workers work. Every organization has a set of assumptions that guide how things are done. You can think of these assumptions as the organization's operating system. For more than a century, most companies have been using what we can call the legacy operating system, or legacy OS. The legacy OS includes all the structures, norms, and practices we're used to in traditional companies. Things like managers, budgets, and performance reviews. We're so used to these things that we hardly notice them anymore. And because they're so common, we rarely stop to question whether they're actually the best way to do things. This legacy OS was born more than 100 years ago. Back then, Factories weren't as efficient as they are today. There were no standard ways of doing things. Experienced workers each had their own methods, and new workers learned on the job by copying what others did. It was more like a craft than an industry. Also, workers often had reasons to work slowly. They were usually paid for each part they made, but if they started making too many parts, the company would often reduce how much they paid per part. So workers would limit how much they produced to avoid getting their pay cut. Then along came a man named Frederick Winslow Taylor. He liked to measure things, and he revolutionized the world of work. Taylor wasn't interested in how long it usually took to make something. He wanted to figure out how long it should take. So he measured every single step in making each part. Then he did something that changed everything. He offered workers a big raise, 15 to 30% more money, if they would do everything exactly the way he said. The workers agreed, and that was the beginning of the legacy organization. Workers gave up their freedom to work their own way in exchange for more money. From that point on, the main idea of the legacy OS became that managers do the thinking and workers do the working. This idea became so common that people just assumed it was the best way to run a business. Spark 4. Organizations are complex, not complicated. Now, let's talk about the difference between complicated and complex. These words might seem like they mean the same thing, but when we're talking about systems, they're actually quite different. A complicated system is one where things have a clear cause and effect relationship. Think of a watch or a car engine. If you take out a part, it stops working. Put the part back in correctly, and it starts working again. Complicated systems are predictable. Taking out a part of a watch will never make it do something crazy like run backward or play music. Complex systems, on the other hand, are different. Things like traffic or weather are complex. You can make educated guesses about what they're going to do, but you can't know for sure. To predict what they might do, you have to get to know them and learn their quirks. You can't just read a manual and understand everything about them. One of the big problems with the legacy OS is that it treats organizations like they're complicated systems. It assumes that there's a perfect set of rules out there, and if we can just figure them out, everything will work smoothly. But that's not how it works. People are complex, and when you bring a bunch of people together in an organization, you get a complex system. And here's the thing about complex systems. You can't solve all their problems. The best you can do is try to manage them. Spark 5. The evolutionary organization, more like a roundabout. Now, let's talk about a different way of organizing companies. We'll call these evolutionary organizations. To understand the difference, let's compare two ways of managing traffic: traffic lights and roundabouts. Traffic lights are like legacy organizations. They're common and familiar. They tell people exactly what to do. Red means stop, green means go. But roundabouts work differently. There are only two main rules. Follow the flow of traffic and yield to cars already in the circle. Drivers have to use their judgment to navigate. You might think that traffic lights are better because they're more common. But actually, roundabouts are superior in almost every way. They reduce traffic delays by 89%, cost less to maintain, reduce fatal collisions by 90%, and even work when the power goes out. The only reason we still use traffic lights more often is because we're used to them. We assume they must be effective because they're familiar. The same is true for legacy organizations. We're used to them, so we assume they must be the best way to do things. But what if we tried something different? What if, instead of having strict rules for everything and a rigid hierarchy, we designed an organization that allowed people to move more freely and use their own judgment to tackle complex issues at work? That's what an evolutionary organization tries to do. Spark 6. Characteristics of evolutionary organizations. So, what exactly makes an organization evolutionary? There are two main characteristics to keep in mind. 1. They are complexity conscious. This means they understand that businesses are complex systems. They're aware of the complexity of the world in general and of human beings in particular. 2. They are people positive. They believe that when people are given power and responsibility in the workplace, they're capable of dealing with complexity. Let's look at an example of how this works in practice. There was a nuclear submarine called the USS Santa Fe that was performing worse than every other sub in the fleet. Then a new commander named David Marquet took over, and under his command, it became the best. How did he do it? Instead of giving orders all the time, Marquet shared his vision for the submarine and then asked his crew, "What do you intend to do?" At first, the crew was confused. They were used to just following orders. But over time, they started to think for themselves and take responsibility for running the submarine. Marquet created an environment where the crew could try new things and learn. He gave them more control, which allowed them to come up with quick solutions to complex problems. He also encouraged them to take ownership of their work. In other words, he was people positive and complexity conscious. Now, there's no one-size-fits-all plan for changing from a legacy organization to an evolutionary organization. Each company has to find its own path. But by understanding these principles, you can start to move in the right direction. Spark 7. Rethinking structure and purpose. Let's look at two important areas that evolutionary organizations often change: structure and purpose. Structure is about how the organization is set up. For example, there's a company called Morningstar that processes tomatoes. Every year, each of their 400 employees writes their own job description and sets their own salary. Then their co-workers review and suggest improvements. This replaces top-down orders with community input. Another example is Buurtzorg, a Dutch healthcare company. They have 14,000 nurses, but only about 50 people in their core team. How do they manage this? They split the nurses into self-managing teams of 12 people each. These teams handle their own scheduling, recruiting, and other tasks. It's like having a bunch of small businesses all working towards the same goal. Purpose is about why the organization exists. In evolutionary organizations, the purpose should contribute to human happiness and well-being. For example, Tesla's mission is to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. It's inspiring, but it's also quite vague. Facebook has a good system for keeping their purpose both inspiring and practical. Twice a year, they think about where they want to be in 30 years, and then ask what they can do in the next 6 months to get closer to that goal. This helps them focus on both the big picture and immediate actions. Spark 8. Rethinking meetings and membership. Now let's talk about two more areas that evolutionary organizations often change: meetings and membership. Meetings are a big issue in many companies. The average employee thinks about half the meetings they attend are a waste of time, and they attend about 62 meetings per month. Meetings are important to look at because they're like a small version of how the whole organization works. One way to improve meetings is to try a meeting moratorium. This means canceling all meetings for 2 weeks. It might seem impossible, but it can work. The author once worked with a team that spent 45 hours a week in meetings. After the 2-week break, they were able to do the same work in just 18 hours of meetings. After the break, you can start having meetings again, but be more thoughtful about them. Each meeting should have a clear purpose and be structured around that purpose. If it doesn't, it's probably not necessary. Membership is about who is part of the organization and who isn't. This includes hiring practices. When hiring new people, it's important to make sure their personality and passions align with the company's mission and environment. However, be careful about only hiring for culture fit. This can work well when a company is starting out, but later on it can lead to underperformance. It's better to hire people who will contribute to your culture, not just fit into it. Spark 9. Continuous change. Finally, let's talk about how evolutionary organizations approach change. Many leaders think of change as a journey from point A to point B, with a clear map and destination. But this isn't the best way to think about it. Change isn't a series of steps you can follow. It's more like pouring milk into coffee, an immediate transformation as two things mix together. To achieve this kind of change, you have to change how you think about change itself. No more top-down change initiatives or CEOs announcing new company values. You can't change a bureaucratic hierarchy using bureaucratic methods. Instead, change should be continuous and participatory. One way to do this is through a technique called looping. There are 3 stages in a loop. 1. Identifying tensions, problems, or opportunities. 2. Proposing practices, possible solutions. 3. Conducting experiments, trying out the solutions. After the 3rd stage, you go back to the first, creating a continuous cycle of improvement. For example, a team might identify a tension. Only the loudest voices get heard in meetings. They might propose a practice of starting each meeting with a check-in where everyone speaks. Then they experiment with this practice to see if it helps. There's no list of every possible tension or solution. What works for one team or organization might not work for another. Remember, we're dealing with complex systems. But if you keep this in mind and empower your colleagues to do the same, you'll be on your way to creating an evolutionary organization and doing the best work of your life. In conclusion, the world of work is changing rapidly, and traditional ways of organizing businesses are becoming less effective. By embracing the principles of evolutionary organizations, being complexity-conscious and people-positive, rethinking areas like structure, purpose, meetings, and membership, and approaching change as a continuous process, companies can adapt and thrive in this new environment. It's not an easy journey, but it's one that can lead to more effective, more human-centered, and ultimately more successful organizations.